So I've often talked about the psychology of trading, and it's interesting to go through this experience and watch other people go through the experience of trying to trade, because you learn a couple of different things about the way that people think, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. So when you're looking at the psychology of trading, it's basically geared around loss aversion. And loss aversion is a weird thing, because very often it doesn't make any real sense. It's totally expected that when you're in any position that involves risk, such as trading, that you're going to have profits and you're going to have losses. And it's about the proportion of those to each other that's important. It's not the fact that you make a profit or a loss. It's just that overall you're going to get a balance between those two, and your role as a trader is to tip that balance slightly in your favor, which is perfectly possible. But the amazing thing is that some people find it very, very, very easy to lose money. In fact, they're looking so hard to avoid a loss that they just find them all over the place. And this was a weird characteristic for me, because I'd sort of forgotten that I used to be in that mode many years ago, but I actually outlearnt it. I found a way to overcome that. The core principle when you're trading is that, in fact, if you trade at random, you're neither really going to make much money or lose much money. And in fact, what you're going to lose overall is the cost of doing that business. So for example, when you win, there'll be a commission. When you lose, there is no commission. So even if you traded completely at randomly, your maximum possible loss would be the commission you pay on your winning trade. Everything else would balance out. But when you look at people that lose money trading, what you tend to find is that their losses are out of all proportion to their profits. And what actually happens is that you actually get the situation where when a profit is made, they're taking the profit too early, and when a loss is made, they're so desperate to avoid it that they end up increasing it one way or another. And there's a net imbalance between the two sides. That's the number one thing that I find when I'm looking at traders with a negative expectancy. And in fact, usually what I say to people is just try trading at random, and you'll find actually that your strike rate and your profitability goes rocketing, because sometimes you'll get a positive fluky trade that ends up making a lot of money, and you'll end up getting less negative simply because you're not looking for them and you're just letting things run their course. A lot of negative trades, turn positive over the course of a particular trading period. But typically, what actually happens is, on your shoulders, you have two different, it's what I call the webcam syndrome, or the over-the-shoulder syndrome. When you're trading, sometimes you enter a trade, and at the point at which you enter the trade, it starts to flip and turn the other way, and you're sort of thinking, well, how did that happen? How's that possible? But actually, it's going on up here. It's not some mysterious force in the market that's deliberately trying to force you. It's the negative expectancy you're creating yourself within your own mind. And that's driven by two factors. You have a positive factor that can be described pretty much as the logical side of the trade, where on one shoulder you've actually got somebody talking to you, and what they're actually saying is something like this. Well, if we take into account all of the factors within the market, it's not a perfect position, but I think this has a fair chance of a payoff. And in fact, when you've seen these positions before, this looks pretty reasonable. I think that this position is safe, and that you'll be okay with this one. On the other side of your shoulder, what you actually end up with is the negative emotional side of things. And what that's actually saying to you is something like this. No, Peter, don't do it. Don't do it. Oh, it's a terrible position. You're going to lose money. It's a nightmare. Get out of there quickly. Act on it now. Don't wait. Oh my God, it's just appalling. Don't do it. Oh, just get out of it. You're going to lose money. It's a disaster. What are you doing? It's terrible. Just get out of there. Now, the interesting thing about both of these modes of operation is, in fact, the logical positive side of you is actually quieter than the emotional side. What you tend to find is if you actually looked at the two together, well, if we take into account all of the factors,
it's a terrible position.
It's not a
You're going to lose money. It's a nightmare. Get out of there quickly. Act on it now. Don't wait. Oh my God, it's just appalling. Don't do it. Oh, just get out of it.
As you can hear, what actually happens is that the negative emotions tend to drown out the positive ones. And this is an inbuilt reaction from when we were cavemen. If you were walking down a valley, you heard a rustle in a bush, back in those days, when there were saber-toothed tigers and, if you were injured, then that was it. Your life was pretty much over or severely limited. One of the issues that you would have in those days is if you heard a rustle in the bush, then you would tend to treat it as a threat. What do? Do you go over there, poke your head through the bush, and then suddenly you get your head ripped off? Or do you just avoid it altogether? So in fact, our minds are made up of something that was, relevant 100,000 years ago. And the problem that you have from a psychological perspective is that when you have something that could potentially be a loss or put yourself into a loss-making position, that carries much more weight than the positive aspect of things. So that's something that you have to fight and overcome. You have to be able to remove the emotion from a situation. And I can pretty much tell now somebody that's going to make a good trader, because when I ask for a bio or I talk to somebody, you can tell if somebody is very reactionary and emotional. And those are the type of people that have a tendency not to be able to balance out those two risks, because they're unable to control that emotion. It overrides it and it will lead them down the wrong path, when in fact you need to have a better balance between the two. And it is a struggle because, like I said, one side is louder than the other. And that causes you problems because you tend to listen to the one that's the loudest, or you tend to react to that the quickest. And in fact, the trick that I tend to use is when I'm faced with a situation, then I tend to just pause for a short period of time to reevaluate it rather than just jumping in immediately. You realize that little pause, it could turn a position for or against you, but introducing that little pause will allow you to think it through rationally. Whereas if you're irrational and emotional, then you tend to make the wrong decision, and all of the psychology hidden in the back of your brain will come forward and create a bad situation for you. So when you look at when I'm trading, I'm actually pretty quiet. I don't swear, run around, go mental, and treat it like a fight and bring my sword out and start waving it around. I actually sit there and I'm sort of quite casual in the way in which I do things. And if I get a big win, that's great. And if I get a big loss, well, that doesn't make much difference to me. I treat everything roughly equally, and it's more about the result at the end of the day and at the end of the session that's more valuable to me rather than what's going on immediately in front of me. But yeah, if you're going to be a successful trader, you have to battle that emotion inside you, because it will tend to lead you down the wrong path. It was a frame of mind that worked well 100,000 years ago, doesn't work so well when you're active and trading a market nowadays. But bear that in mind the next time you trade.